The night gathers over the western front like a slow descent of ash, cold, weighty, and utterly still. You move along the trench not as a soldier, but as a drifting observer, carried through a world carved deep by fear and frost. Every sound arrives softened: the rustle of damp greatcoats, the distant groan of wooden planks under tired boots, the faint crackle of ice clinging to the edges of dugouts. Before you drift off, if this quiet moment of humanity in the middle of winter felt like a place you needed tonight, you're welcome to subscribe, softly, without hurry. And if you'd like, share where you're listening from, or which part of this fragile night stayed with you the most. You're listening to Echoes of War. It is late December, 1914, the first Christmas of the war. You watch men huddle along the fire step, their faces drawn, their breath silvering in the air. They carry the exhaustion of months, the sorrow of letters read under flickering lamps, the quiet dread that tomorrow will be the same as yesterday. Their gloves are stiff with cold. Their voices are rough, when they speak at all. No man's land lies ahead, a wasteland of broken earth and frozen shell holes, still and colorless beneath a sky drained of light. Nothing moves across it. Nothing dares. The world here feels suspended, held in a kind of breathless tension, as if the land is waiting for something it cannot name. Even the cannons, so quick to roar, have fallen silent tonight. Then, across the darkening horizon, you notice a faint glow, small points of warm orange flickering along the German line. At first you might mistake them for signal flares or lanterns. But they do not rise. They do not flash. They simply glow, soft and steady, like scattered embers refusing to die. A few British soldiers lift their heads, eyes narrowing with disbelief. It's lights, one murmurs. Another rubs his hands together, uncertain. Never seen that before. The wind drifts gently, carrying a cold so sharp it feels almost crystalline. It moves through the trenches with a strange clarity, the kind that reveals small details. A soldier rubbing frost from a photograph, another adjusting his collar against the biting air, a chaplain offering a quiet blessing to no one in particular. And then the atmosphere shifts. Not with movement, not with danger, but with something softer, subtler, a tremor in the silence itself. From beyond the wire, through the frozen night, a voice rises. A single note, faint, delicate, carried on the wind like a fragile thread of memory. You feel the soldiers freeze, every conversation falling away, every breath held in place. Even the cold seems to pause. The melody grows, trembling at first, then steady. A hymn. Familiar. Timeless. It drifts across the darkness, reaching your side of the lines as gently as falling snow. For the first time since the war began, the night does not feel like an enemy. It feels human. The voice drifts through the frost like a lantern's glow carried on breath alone, fragile, wavering, yet impossibly clear against the silence. You remain still, a quiet witness to the way every soldier in the trench turns his head ever so slightly, drawn toward that sound as if by instinct. Still nacked. The words float gently across no man's land, softened by distance, scrubbed clean by cold air. They rise above the shattered earth with a kind of trembling bravery, a melody too delicate to belong to a battlefield, too familiar not to stir something deep inside every man who hears it. More voices join in. A small chorus, tentative but warm. Candles flicker along the German line, their light forming a wavering ribbon of gold against the dark. You watch the British soldiers lean closer to the parapet, not to fire, not to prepare, but simply to listen. One man lowers his rifle, slowly, carefully, as though the act itself might disturb the fragile peace. Another removes his cap, holding it against his chest with a reverence he didn't know he still possessed. A few soft hums emerge from your side of the trenches, hesitant at first, then steadier. Not defiance, not challenge, just recognition. Two languages, one song, and a world paused between them. The melody settles over the frozen waste, filling the space where violence usually lives. For a moment, no man's land feels less like a graveyard and more like a vast, open cathedral, cold, silent, and listening. You watch the men exchange glances, confused, moved, unsure whether to trust what they're hearing. But none of them turn away. Above, the stars burn with winter clarity, sharp and indifferent witnesses to this impossible exchange. The night holds the moment gently, as though afraid to let it slip. What began as a single, trembling voice has become a bridge. Thin, fragile, beautiful, a thread of humanity stretching across a land meant only for death. And though no orders have been given, no armistice declared, you can feel it. Tonight, something in the war has shifted. Not ended, not forgiven, but paused. For a breath, for a hymn, for a shared memory of peace. Morning creeps into the trenches without color, just a dull, washed-out gray that settles like dust over everything it touches. You drift along the worn duckboards, watching men rise stiffly from their cramped dugouts, shoulders hunched against the cold that has seeped into their bones overnight. Nothing here feels awake. Not the sky, not the earth, not the men. Frost clings to the sandbags like a thin crust of glass. Water pooled in the bottom of the trench has frozen into uneven skins of ice. A soldier taps one with his boot and watches it crack apart, as if the world itself is too brittle to hold together. You observe small rituals unfold around you, a private rubbing warmth back into his fingers before attempting to write a few lines home, a sergeant shaking frost from his mustache with a muttered curse, a chaplain offering a quiet, steady prayer to no one in particular, all of it done without haste, without expectation, as though these tasks are the only things anchoring them to reality. The smell of damp earth rises with each shallow breath of wind. Somewhere behind you, a cook stokes a brazier, its tiny flames struggling against moisture and cold, trying to coax life into a pot of thin, watery stew. Steam curls upward, mixing with the soldier's breath until it's impossible to tell warmth from exhaustion. You hear snippets of conversations, about how long they believe the winter will last, about letters from home, about family and friends being drafted or being enlisted for war. But even their complaints feel subdued, softened by the weight of the season. Nothing here rises above a murmur. Across no man's land, the German trenches lie quiet as well. No shots, no shouts, just the same oppressive stillness, as if both armies have agreed, unconsciously, unwillingly, to let the morning pass without stirring the war awake. You feel the cold settle into you too, though not in a way that hurts. More like an awareness, the quiet heaviness of a world caught between breaths, where time seems to stretch long and thin like the pale winter light. And beneath it all, beneath the familiar grind of survival, there is something else in the air. Not hope, not peace, but a faint, unspoken tension, a sense that the day carries an unusual weight, as though the front itself is waiting for something it has never known before. The soldiers feel it too, even if none of them speak it aloud. Afternoon settles in without changing the light. The sky simply fades into a deeper shade of gray, as if the day is folding in on itself. You drift along the trench and feel the cold tighten its grip, sharper now, threading through wool, creeping beneath collars, settling in joints already stiff from the long months of waiting. They move through their routines with the steady patience of men who know nothing here will hurry for them. A few repair a sagging section of sandbags, breathing through chapped lips. Others scrape mud from their boots with slow, tired strokes, as if removing a burden they'll only gather again within the hour. From farther down the line, you catch fragments of conversation carried by the wind, not in clear exchanges, but in softened impressions. Someone wonders aloud how long this winter intends to last. Another answers with a bitter laugh, certain it will freeze them solid before it loosens its hold. A third mentions a letter from home, a mother writing about a neighbor's boy who has just enlisted. There's a quiet scoff in response, a rough voice remarking that the lad won't be smiling once he's knee-deep in this mud and cold. None of them speak loudly. The trench itself seems to hush their voices, as though the earth is listening. You watch as one man pulls a small parcel from his pocket, unwrapping it carefully to reveal 2 biscuits and a sliver of chocolate, a gift from home. He breaks one biscuit in half and shares it with the fellow beside him. Neither of them smiles, but something softens in the moment, like a thin crack of warmth inside the frost. Across no man's land, the German line remains quiet, unusually so. No warning shots, no sharp calls, just the same heavy stillness, mirroring your own side as though both armies drift beneath the same unspoken weight. A faint wind moves over the battlefield, carrying the scent of cold metal, damp soil, and distant smoke. It brushes against the wire and tugs lightly at the frayed edges of uniforms, like a whisper trying to be heard. You feel an undercurrent running beneath the monotony. Not hope, not anticipation, but something subtle, almost imperceptible. A shift. A tension that isn't born of fear, but of possibility. They feel it too. You see it in the way they pause, the way they glance across the empty land more often than usual, the way their voices trail off mid-sentence. Something gathers in the air, quiet, fragile, waiting, and though nothing yet has changed, the day carries the sense of a threshold. The sense that night will bring something the war has not seen before, something the cold cannot suppress, and the trenches cannot hold back. You remain poised in that stillness, a silent witness to a world on the edge of the impossible. Evening does not arrive here so much as it gathers, slowly, quietly, drawing its shadows across the trench like a long coat being pulled around the shoulders of the world. You sense the temperature drop before the light changes, a deeper cold threading into the planks and earth, making every surface feel sharper, more brittle. They move with slower steps now, boots slipping on frost, breath rising in pale ribbons. A few men cup their hands around a brazier's weak flame, coaxing heat from scraps of wood that smoke far more than they burn. The little fire reflects in their eyes, tired eyes, hungry for anything that resembles warmth. Across no man's land, the darkness thickens, yet something interrupts it. Small lights begin to appear along the German parapet, faint at first, uncertain, as though the night is unsure whether to accept them. But they grow steadier, tiny flames trembling atop what look like small fir branches. A strange sight, almost absurd against the backdrop of ruin. You watch the British soldiers, notice them one by one. A silence spreads, different from the usual quiet, different from fear. It's the hush of minds trying to understand something unexpected. They exchange glances that hold no hostility, only bewilderment. One man rubs frost from his eyelashes as though clearing his vision. Another tilts his head slightly, uncertain whether the warmth of candlelight can be trusted on a battlefield where everything warm is usually taken away. The lights flicker again, more of them now. Not lanterns, not signals, candles. And then, carried on a drifting current of cold air, something even stranger. A sound, a single voice singing. The tone soft, rounded by distance, yet unmistakably shaped by yearning. It doesn't rise boldly. It approaches gently, almost apologetically, as though uncertain it has a right to exist here at all. The British soldiers fall still, heads turning, boots frozen to the duckboards. You sense the tension, yes, that instinctive bracing for trickery or danger. But beneath it, something else stirs. Recognition. The melody continues, gaining confidence as more voices join in from the German line. The harmonies weave together like threads of warm breath in the icy dark, forming a fragile ribbon stretching across the broken earth. From your vantage, the soldiers look different in this moment. Less like silhouettes carved by war, and more like figures caught in the glow of something ancient and familiar. The song deepens. The night listens. No one here expected music. No one expected a sound so gentle it feels almost like memory. But you can feel the front shifting, just slightly, just enough, as the first quiet notes settle into the frozen air, bridging the distance between men who have never spoken yet know the same winter, the same longing, the same hymn. The songs deepen. The lines soften. You remain the silent witness. The singing spreads slowly at first, as though unsure whether it should cross the ravaged ground between the trenches. But the night carries it, gently, faithfully, lifting each note into the air where the cold can't quite mute it. You drift closer to the fire step, watching as the British soldiers lean outward, not with rifles raised, but with their faces turned toward the sound. Some stand perfectly still, as though afraid to break the spell. Others shift their weight, a small, instinctive move to see better, to understand what is unfolding. The German voices grow stronger, harmonies folding into one another with the softness of falling snow. Their candles tremble but remain alive, each one a tiny defiance of the darkness. The light moves across their faces just enough to reveal hints of youth, fatigue, and something gentler than either side expected to see tonight. Near you, one of the British soldiers begins to hum along, a low, cautious sound, nothing more than breath shaped into melody. Another follows. Then another. Not an attempt to match the Germans, not a challenge, but a recognition of a song both sides were raised with long before they carried rifles. The hum swells into singing, hesitant but true. You feel the shift as it happens, that rare, impossible moment when the boundary between enemies thins, not erased, but softened enough to let something human pass through. For the first time since the war began, the voices of both armies rise together. Two languages. One hymn. It moves across the frost like a warm current, brushing against the wire, filling the craters, threading through the still air that has heard nothing but gunfire for months. The notes catch on the twisted metal, on abandoned helmets half buried in mud, on the frozen pools where stars reflect like scattered shards of sky. A few soldiers on your side glance upward, perhaps expecting the spell to break, perhaps expecting command to intervene. But no orders come, no whistle, no shouted command. Only the quiet of men listening to each other in a way the war never intended. Further down the trench, a voice calls softly into the night. Not a shout, not an insult, but a wish for a Merry Christmas spoken across the void. The words drift over the broken ground, fragile enough to shatter, bold enough to be heard. From the German side, an answer returns, accented, warm, carrying the same restrained joy. The men near you react not with cheers, but with stillness, a breath held, a disbelief shared. You watch them exchange looks, not of victory or relief, but of something deeper, quieter, almost reverent. This moment, small as a candle flame, has carved a space in the war where violence does not belong. The songs continue, the candles burn on, and the night, vast and cold, listens as two armies remember, even for a brief, trembling moment, that they were human long before they were soldiers. Night settles fully now, turning no man's land into a pale, frozen tapestry under the thin winter moon. The hymns fade into silence, but the quiet they leave behind is not the usual kind, not the wary emptiness that follows gunfire, not the taut stillness before an attack. This is different, gentler, expectant. You drift along the trench as the soldiers do, their movements careful, hesitant, shaped by wonder more than fear. They murmur softly among themselves, voices low so the moment does not crack. A few attempt to peer over the parapet, not with rifles, but with the tentative curiosity of men who cannot quite believe what they have heard. Across the frost-bound expanse, a lantern rises above the German line. Its glow widens, a small warm halo trembling in the cold air. Then a figure emerges, slowly, cautiously, climbing onto the parapet with empty hands raised just high enough to be seen. You feel the British line shift as dozens of eyes narrow in disbelief. A man steps openly into the night. On a battlefield. Unarmed. There is an instinctive tightening. Shoulders stiffen, breaths catch, fingers hover near triggers though none wish to pull them. Even the officers fall still, watching the lone figure with a mixture of dread and awe. The German soldier steps down from his parapet and onto the frozen ground. His boot sinks lightly into a crust of frost. He hesitates, not from fear, but from the weight of what he is doing, then takes another step. You watch the British soldiers take in every detail, the slow movements, the raised hands, the lantern light spilling over a face that looks far too young to carry such courage. A quiet murmur spreads through the trench, soft as breath on glass. Not a call to arms. Not a warning. More like a collective wondering. Is he truly coming forward? Is this real? The soldier continues his cautious descent into no man's land until he stands upon open ground, a place no one crosses unless they are charging or dying. Behind him, another German appears. And another. 3 now. All unarmed. All stepping into the dim winter air with the slow reverence of men approaching a church aisle. The British soldiers watch in stunned silence. The fear is still there, sharp, instinctive, but it is hollowed out by something stronger, a deep human pull toward the impossible unfolding before them. A British private nearby shifts forward, just a fraction, drawn by the sight. His breath rises into the moonlight like thin smoke. Around him, men trade glances filled with disbelief and a fragile, unspoken hope they barely dare to feel. Out on the frozen ground, the German soldier pauses. He glances back toward his own line. A signal. An invitation. The battlefield feels suspended, a vast, breathless stillness stretching between two trenches. You sense it more than see it, the moment when fear loosens very slightly, as if the war has stepped back for one fleeting heartbeat. Tonight, someone has taken the first step into the space where enemies meet as men, and the night waits to see what the others will do. The space between the lines begins to change. You witness, unseen, as caution becomes courage. The first German stands alone for a while, lantern glow trembling around him like a fragile aura. The cold sculpts his breath into faint ghosts that drift upward and vanish. Behind him, the other two linger only a few steps back, sharing the same stillness, the same unspoken question hanging in the frozen air. On the British side, no orders come, no whistles, no shouts. Only a long, heavy quiet broken now and then by the subtle creak of a leather strap or the faint shift of boots on frosted boards. You sense how torn they are, every man caught between instinct and wonder. Months of fear instruct them to be wary, to see danger in every gesture. But something softer pushes back, the memory of voices singing across the darkness, the sight of candles defying the winter night. One of the British soldiers, older, stoop-shouldered, wrapped in a greatcoat patched at the elbows, edges closer to the parapet. Not climbing, not committing, just leaning forward enough to take in the scene with clearer eyes. He holds a small white cloth, not raised in surrender or command, but crumpled loosely in one hand, almost as if his fingers found it without thinking. Further down the line, whispers move like a slow current. A man wonders if this is a trick, though his voice lacks conviction. Another mutters that no trick starts with candles and hymns. A third breathes something about Christmas, and the word seems to settle over them like a thin blanket. Beyond the wire, the lone German kneels. Very slowly, very deliberately. From his coat he draws a small object, a tin, its metal catching the moonlight in a faint shimmer. He places it gently in the frost, as though offering it to the earth itself. Behind him, the other two soldiers nod with almost ceremonial solemnity. You watch the British men react with a mixture of disbelief and warmth. One of them exhales sharply, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sigh. Another's shoulders relax just a little, tension draining from him like fading steam. Still, no one moves onto the open ground. Not yet. But you can feel it, the soft, invisible pull drawing both sides toward the same fragile center. A force older than the war, older than fear, older than the uniforms that divide them. A British soldier shifts, stepping upward so he can stand fully on the fire step. Lantern light catches the edge of his face, revealing a tentative, almost childlike expression. He doesn't wave. He doesn't call out. He simply stands where he can be seen, breathing into the cold as though offering proof of life. Across the field, the Germans straighten. One lifts a hand in a small greeting, not a salute, not a gesture of victory, but a quiet acknowledgement. The British soldier hesitates, then lifts his hand, mirroring the gesture with a shy, uncertain motion. It is barely anything. Just two hands raised in a night that has known only violence. But it is enough. A ripple moves through both trenches, not excitement, not relief, but something gentler. A loosening. A thaw. You see it in their postures, in their breath, in the way their eyes linger on one another across the frozen distance. The harsh geometry of war softens, edges blurring just enough to let something human pass between the lines. For the first time, the open ground between them feels less like a threat, and more like a meeting place waiting to be crossed. The first crossing begins. The night holds its breath. You witness the moment the war loosens its grip. No man's land has never known footsteps like these. Not cautious advances. Not desperate charges. Not the frantic scrabble of men seeking cover. These footsteps are slower, gentler, anchored in hesitation and fragile hope. You drift closer to the parapet, keeping to the shadows as the British soldiers do, their forms stiff and silhouetted against the dim glow of lanterns. Every man here seems caught between the urge to watch and the fear of breaking whatever delicate balance holds the night so still. Across the field, the German soldier who placed the tin straightens fully. His posture is careful, almost ceremonial, as though aware that each movement carries the weight of something greater than himself. He raises both hands once more, palms open to the cold, and steps forward. Just a single pace. Then another. The frost crunches softly under his boots, each sound carrying farther than it should in the brittle silence. The British soldiers lean closer, not one of them raising a weapon. Their rifles rest against the earth, forgotten for the moment. A tension curls through the air, not hostile but immense. A tension born from possibility. Behind the first German, the other two follow. Their movements echo his, slow, respectful, deliberate. They carry no rifles, no bayonets, nothing but the tentative bravery of men stepping into a space where death has ruled for months. On the British side, a few soldiers climb onto the fire step, drawn forward by instinct or disbelief. They remain rooted to their own line, but their bodies angle outward, as though a part of them has already crossed. You see hands gripping the edge of the parapet not with fear, but with anticipation. The officers say nothing. No one stops this. The war, for once, refuses to speak. The first German halts near a frozen shell crater. He lowers his hands and glances back, as if seeking reassurance from his comrades. He receives it, a subtle nod, a barely audible breath that hangs in the air like frosted smoke. From the British trench, a small stir runs through the men. A soldier with a worn wool scarf steps forward, just enough for the lantern light to catch the side of his face. He lifts one hand, not high, not bold, but slowly, gently, like someone waking from a long, brutal dream. The German notices. He mirrors the gesture. A silent greeting passes between them, thin as thread but strong enough to hold the moment intact. You feel the earth shift under this exchange. The weight of months of hatred, fear, and orders wavers, just slightly, as though the land itself is uncertain how to behave when men refuse to act like enemies. For the first time, the distance between the two sides feels negotiable, a space not only of danger, but of possibility. And in that quiet, cold breath of time, you witness the first undeniable truth of the night. Someone will cross fully. Someone will bridge the divide. It's only a matter of who moves first. The moment the first crossings happen, you watch, unseen, as fear bends to something gentler. For a long stretch of seconds, no one moves, not fully. The Germans stand at the edge of the frozen crater, hands open to the night. The British soldiers lean outward from their trench, caught between caution and wonder, and the great silence between them becomes so thick you can almost feel it resting against your skin. Then, from farther down the British line, a figure rises into clear view. Not quickly, not boldly, but with the steady, careful composure of someone who knows every eye on both sides is watching. He is a young man, wrapped in a greatcoat far too large for his shoulders. His breath streams into the moonlight as he steps onto the fire step, gripping the edge of the parapet as if trying to steady his own disbelief. You see his fingers tighten, then relax. Slowly, he lifts a hand, a tentative greeting, a small gesture offered into the cold. Across no man's land, one of the Germans responds with a quiet nod. A soft wave. Something warm flickering on his face, visible even from this distance. This mirror of gestures feels like a hinge turning, a moment when the war blinks, unsure of itself. More British soldiers edge upward, drawn by the sight. Not one reaches for a weapon. They simply stand where they can see clearly, their breath rising in thin wisps, their faces lit by the faint glow of lanterns and moonlight. You drift above them, watching the subtle shifts, the loosening of shoulders, the softening of eyes, the small exhale of relief that no one dares to name. One British soldier, older, with a scarf wound tightly around his neck, takes a single step beyond the parapet, his boots crunching lightly against frost. He doesn't descend fully into no man's land. He simply stands on the outer ledge, suspended between the world he knows and the one unfolding before him. The Germans notice. They step forward as well, matching his movement with the same halting grace. A few British men murmur among themselves. You catch only fragments, shaped by breath and cold. A quiet marveling that this is happening at all. A disbelief that the war could loosen enough to allow it. A hint of something like hope, fragile and trembling like the candle flames across the way. The German soldier who placed the tin gestures toward it now, urging the British to take it. His movement is small, almost shy, but unmistakably sincere. On the British side, a man shifts forward as if drawn by magnetism alone. He doesn't climb out. He doesn't rush. But he leans closer, body angled toward the open ground, eyes fixed on the offering. And in that delicate space, The narrow valley between hesitation and courage. You feel the entire front lean with him. The air changes. It warms, just slightly, in the presence of something human. What began with a lantern, then a hymn, then a greeting, has become something larger, a pull that neither side seems willing to resist. You remain above it all, watching the thin, trembling boundary between enemies begin to dissolve, not with declarations or orders, but with shared breath in the cold and gestures carried gently across the frost. Soon, someone will take the next step. Soon, feet will press into the open ground fully. Soon, the war will yield, if only for one night, to the oldest truth men have ever known. They were never meant to be enemies. The cold deepens as night stretches itself across the front, settling into the earth, the wire, the splintered boards. But in spite of it, or perhaps because of it, something warmer begins to take shape in the space between the trenches. You feel it before you see it, a quiet swell in the air, like the gentle rise of breath after a long sob. The British soldier on the outer ledge stands in stillness, boots planted on frozen mud, breath drifting in faint white ribbons. Across from him, the Germans remain near the crater, hands still raised, their lantern glow flickering across young faces drawn by cold and months of war. The silence between them holds, stretched thin but unbroken. Then, almost imperceptibly, the balance shifts. One of the Germans, the one who placed the tin, lowers his hands and takes a step forward. Not bold, not reckless, just a single, deliberate stride into the open white space. His boots sink lightly into the frost. He pauses, glances toward his own line, then back toward the British, as though seeking permission no one can give but everyone already feels. You watch the men on both sides stiffen, not in alarm but in awe. This movement is not ordinary. This step is not small. It is the kind of step that changes the shape of a night. Another German joins him, matching the pace, their figures edging farther into the expanse where no man is meant to stand without being swallowed by gunfire. But tonight, no rifles lift. No machine guns stir. The trenches behind them are silent, as if the war itself is holding its breath. On the British ledge, the young soldier shifts, a single half-step downward, barely more than a lean. His boots scrape frost. His breath catches. You can see the conflict in the angle of his shoulders, the instinct to stay alive, the instinct to reach out. Someone behind him murmurs, not a warning, not a command, but a simple, astonished breath shaped into words. It drifts like a sigh into the cold, a recognition that something sacred is unfolding. And then, it happens. The young British soldier lowers himself from the ledge and places both feet onto the frozen ground of no man's land. Not running, not rushing, not even fully committed yet. Just standing. Two armies watch. You watch. The night watches. The silence deepens, thick as snowfall, soft as wool around the shoulders of the world. The British soldier takes a tentative step forward. The Germans mirror him. 3 men on one side, 1 man on the other, all walking toward the same impossible center. Behind them, dozens more lean forward, their breath, their longing, their disbelief all moving with them, as if the whole weight of the front has shifted by a single degree. The distance shrinks. The space between their breaths narrows. The ground beneath them becomes less battlefield and more meeting place. No guns, no commands, no hatred, only footsteps carried lightly across frost, and the ancient, trembling recognition that enemies are often just strangers who have never had the chance to speak. The meeting in the middle. You witness the moment the war yields to something older, quieter, and profoundly human. The first British soldier walks with the halting steps of someone approaching a dream he's afraid will vanish if he breathes too deeply. His boots sink into the shallow crust of ice, each movement careful, reverent, as though he's entering sacred ground. And in a way, he is. From the German side, the three soldiers advance as well, not in formation, not in challenge, but with a kind of gentle respect. Their lantern stays behind, but its glow lingers on their coats, a faint shimmer that follows them into the open. You hover above the scene, unseen, as the night tightens around their silhouettes. It's as if the entire battlefield contracts to this one fragile thread of space where feet meet frost and fear loses its shape. Both sides slow as they draw closer. 10 paces between them. Then 8. Then 5. The young British soldier pauses. His breath shivers in the air, forming a small cloud that drifts forward before dissolving. You see the tension in his shoulders, the way his gloved hands twitch at his sides, the way caution battles with the impossible warmth unfolding around him. The oldest German, thin-faced, tired-eyed, takes the final few steps. He stops just beyond arm's reach. The others follow, forming a hesitant, uneven line. A silence settles. Deep. Full. Waiting. Then something subtle happens, too small for a battlefield, too meaningful to ignore. The older German reaches into his coat and draws out a simple object, a cigarette, wrapped in a scrap of paper to keep it dry. He holds it between two fingers, arm extended, offering it across the tiny gulf that still separates them. The British soldier hesitates, not out of suspicion, but because the moment is so unreal that even motion feels fragile. Finally, he steps closer. 1 pace. Just 1. And the distance closes. He accepts the cigarette with a gloved hand. The German nods, a soft, weary gesture of shared understanding. The British soldier mirrors it, the faintest curl of warmth touching his expression. Behind them, the trenches stir with quiet awe. Men lean outward, drawn into the silent gravity of the exchange. No one speaks loudly. No one dares to break the spell. Other soldiers emerge on both sides now, stepping farther into the open, boots crunching in soft rhythm. They approach cautiously, like animals testing the edge of a long-feared clearing. Some carry small gifts. A piece of chocolate wrapped in paper, a tin of pipe tobacco, a worn photograph, a bit of sausage saved from rations. None of it is much. All of it is everything. The British and Germans form small clusters, scattered along the frozen expanse, little circles of men speaking without words, communicating through nods, gestures, hesitant smiles. You observe hands reaching out to shake, to exchange, to greet in ways both unfamiliar and instinctively understood. The barrier between two armies becomes porous, thin as frost on glass. For a few breaths, the war recedes. It doesn't leave. It doesn't surrender. But it steps back, quietly, reluctantly, making room for something older and kinder. And you feel it, almost physically. The moment the lines dissolve, and the night becomes a shared space, instead of a divided one. The exchange grows. You drift among them, unseen, as two armies rediscover the small wonders of ordinary life. The frozen air settles differently now. Not lighter, the cold still cuts deep, but looser, as if the wind itself has softened its edge. You move above the scattered gatherings across no man's land, watching how the soldiers arrange themselves not as enemies, but as weary men standing in a field that has, for this one night, forgotten how to demand blood. The first few groups remain close to their own trenches, still tethered by habit and fear. But more men venture outward with each passing minute, drawn by the sight of others exchanging small treasures under the pale glow of the moon. Some carry candles. Some carry nothing but open hands. None carry rifles. On the British side, a soldier with a knitted cap approaches a German pair, his steps uneven with hesitance. He stops a few paces away, clears his throat softly, and reaches into his coat for a small, folded piece of paper. When he opens it, you see faint pencil marks, a drawing, crude but sincere, of a Christmas tree. He holds it out with a shy tilt of the head. The German nearest him studies it, eyes widening with genuine surprise. He presses a hand over his mouth in something like a stifled laugh, then rummages through his own pockets to produce a small bar of soap, wrapped in browned paper. He offers it gently, with a nod that is both grateful and apologetic. Rations have been thin for both sides. Gifts are never easy to come by. Another cluster forms nearby. A British corporal offering a tin of bully beef. A German soldier answering with a strip of sausage saved from his pack. They break both in half and taste each other's rations, nodding in quiet agreement that neither is particularly impressive. But tonight, everything shared feels like a feast. A pair of Scots stand a little apart, their tartan scarves catching the weak moonlight. One raises a bottle he's been hiding since autumn, its contents barely enough for a swallow each. He gestures toward a young German whose coat is patched at the elbows. The German approaches cautiously, then cups the bottle with both hands as if handling something precious. A small sip, a deep breath, a grateful nod. Everywhere you look, men are discovering one another not as threats, but as weary reflections of themselves. One German soldier, tall, gangly, barely more than a boy, pulls from his coat a mouth organ. He lifts it to his lips and plays a soft, wavering melody that drifts upward like a small bird testing its wings. The tune is simple, threaded with warmth and melancholy. A British soldier, seated on a chunk of frozen earth, closes his eyes to listen. Another man begins humming along, low, steady, adding a second voice to the quiet night. Soon a few others contribute, not loudly, not confidently, but gently enough that the music settles into the landscape like a long, slow exhale. You watch the clusters expand, merge, shift. Hands extend, clasp, retreat. Faces soften, weathered lines easing under lantern glow. The war is still here, its ruins surround them, its scars marked deeply in the land, but for the first time since the trenches were dug, it feels distant, uncertain, as though unsure how to maintain control over men who remember how to speak, how to smile, how to share the small artifacts of ordinary life. For now, the battlefield belongs to them, to their breath, their warmth, their fragile courage to step forward. And to you, drifting quietly among them, witnessing the moment enemies choose, if only for a single night, not to be enemies at all. Games, laughter, and the slow thaw of fear. You watch from above as the night becomes almost impossibly ordinary. The gatherings grow larger, drifting like small constellations across the frozen field. The cold still gnaws at fingers and settles into bones, but the men hardly seem to notice now. Lanterns and candles cast scattered pockets of warm light, flickering against wool coats and steel helmets until the battlefield resembles a strange festival, quiet, subdued, but undeniably human. A group of Germans kneel near a shallow crater, drawing shapes into the frost with gloved fingers. One sketches the outline of a Christmas tree, crude but playful, earning a few muffled chuckles from the men around him. A British soldier wanders close, curious, and adds a star to the top with the toe of his boot. The others nod in approval, and the small act folds seamlessly into the soft rhythm of the night. Nearby, a football appears, battered, misshapen, more laces than leather, produced by a soldier who carries it with the pride of someone offering a family heirloom. He sets it down in the frost and nudges it forward. A German raises his eyebrows in mock challenge. Another grins. A British private shrugs, then sends the ball rolling with a careful tap of his foot. The movement draws attention. More soldiers drift toward the impromptu pitch, not running, not shouting, just gathering with an easy, tentative joy. They test the ball on the frozen ground, passing it back and forth over the pocked surface of no man's land, stumbling occasionally on hidden ridges of ice. Soft laughter rises, so unexpected and gentle that it seems to warm the air itself. None of it feels like competition. It is not a match. It is simply movement, the pleasure of legs stretching after weeks of crouching, the satisfaction of a ball connecting with a boot, the shared delight in the clumsy, frost-bitten dance of men who once chased games across village greens. A few officers linger at the edge of the scene, their expressions caught somewhere between concern and astonishment. One of them pinches the bridge of his nose, as if convincing himself this is real. Another keeps his hands firmly clasped behind his back, but his eyes soften every time the ball skids off toward the wire, and both sides chase it with equal amusement. You drift between the groups, watching small pockets of conversation form without language. Men point to the sky. They gesture to the candles still burning along the parapets. They trace shapes in the air when words fail them. A few share photographs pulled carefully from breast pockets. Mothers, sisters, sweethearts, children. Faces that have journeyed from warm homes to a cold battlefield, preserved in small rectangles of memory. A German soldier shows a photo of his young wife holding a newborn swaddled in blankets. A British soldier studies it with a soft smile, then pulls out his own picture, a younger brother perched on a bicycle, grinning with the whole of his small body. They exchange the photos for a moment, each man touching a piece of the other's life as gently as if it were made of glass. The night hums with low voices, with a soft scuff of boots, with music drifting from the mouth organ as its owner plays tune after tune, some cheerful, some bittersweet. The melodies mingle with breath clouds and lantern light until everything, sound, air, warmth, cold, forms one quiet tapestry. Everywhere, the same subtle miracle unfolds. Men seeing one another not through rifles, but through eyes. Men recognizing themselves in the strangers they were ordered to hate. Men discovering that the distance between them has always been narrower than the trenches believed. The war hangs at the edges of the night, watching but unable to speak. For now, the field belongs to them, the tired, the shivering, the hopeful, the men who, for a brief midnight span, have laid down the weight of fighting to remember what peace feels like, even if only in gestures and laughter woven softly through the frost. Shared rituals, shared songs. You drift through the gathering as the night deepens into something sacred. The night grows colder, yet the field feels warmer than it has in months, warmed not by fire, but by breath, by presence, by the quiet press of humanity gathered in a place meant only for loss. You float above the mingling groups, listening as laughter softens into murmurs, and murmurs into something deeper. A few soldiers, British and German, form a loose circle around a small lantern. The light trembles, catching the frost in their hair and outlining their faces with a faint gold sheen. No one leads. No one commands. Yet slowly, instinctively, the men begin to share pieces of themselves. Someone offers a bit of cheese wrapped in cloth, though it is so small it must have been saved for a special moment. Another pulls out a half-eaten candle stub and places it gently on the ground, its tiny flame reflecting in a dozen pairs of tired eyes. A third man, hands trembling from cold, removes a simple wooden rosary from inside his coat and lays it beside the lantern in a gesture of reverence. Others follow, adding their own small tokens. A broken pencil, a dented spoon, a scrap of ribbon, a piece of chocolate from a parcel long since opened. Each item carries no value in the world beyond the trenches. But here, in this fragile, impossible space, they are offerings. shared symbols of survival, of longing, of home. As you drift closer, you notice a young German soldier clearing a patch of frost with his boot. He kneels, his breath coiling in the frigid air, and begins shaping a small mound of snow. Carefully, he molds it into the rough outline of a candle, then sets a real flame atop it. The tiny fire flickers, swallowing the dark just enough to soften the edges of the night. The men around him nod, not with excitement, but with solemn appreciation. The gesture feels almost liturgical, a winter ritual rising from the mud and ice of no man's land. Farther off, a British soldier begins humming a tune, gentle, familiar. The men beside him recognize it and join in, adding their voices in low, warm layers. The melody moves outward like breath expanding through cold air. Your attention shifts to another group. Here, a German shares a small tin of coffee powder, the last of what he carried since autumn. A British man studies it with surprise. It's been months since coffee was anything more than a rumor. Together, the two kneel by a shallow crater where the ice has cracked. They attempt to light a small flame, shielding it with their hands. The fire doesn't catch. Not the first time. Not the second. But the Germans laugh softly, and the British laugh with them, and the cold doesn't seem quite as harsh as before. They try again, carefully, patiently, like men who suddenly remember that cooperation is older than hatred. On the opposite end of the field, a group of Scots raise their voices in a slow, mournful air. The notes rise high into the night, curling upward into the dark clouds that drift above the ruined landscape. A few Germans listen with closed eyes, their breath catching just slightly at the ancient sadness carried in the tune. Then, from one of them, comes a quiet answer. Not the same melody, not even the same rhythm, but a different song that holds the same weight, the same longing. The two melodies intertwine, weaving through the cold air with a fragile harmony that feels older than the war, older than nations, older than grief itself. And you, drifting like a silent breath among them, feel the shift once again. The battlefield is no longer a place of trenches and wire. Tonight, it feels like a gathering place. A place where men who should have died by each other's hands stand instead side by side, warmed by songs and the faint glow of shared stories. The war waits at the edges, reluctant, uncertain how to reclaim a night that refuses to belong to it. Letters, memories, and confessions exchanged in the cold. You drift through the fragile warmth as men reveal the pieces of themselves the war had tried to bury. The gatherings thin slightly as the night stretches deeper, but not out of reluctance. Rather, the men begin to move in smaller clusters, intimate pockets of conversation where voices lower to something softer, something close to reverence. You drift among them, letting their words reach you not in exact sentences, but in impressions shaped by breath, grief, and the gentle hush of shared humanity. A British soldier kneels on one knee, cradling a worn envelope. He unfolds a letter with careful fingers, smoothing its creases as though tending to something fragile and alive. The German beside him watches with a tilted head, curiosity open on his face. The Brit points to a line on the page, tapping lightly where the ink has smudged. A child's handwriting, shaky and hopeful. The German's expression softens. He reaches into his own coat and draws out a pocketbook. Inside, a photograph, a woman holding an infant wrapped in a blanket, her smile tired but bright. He shows the image to the Brit, who inhales quietly, the sight striking him with unexpected tenderness. No words pass, not ones they both understand, but understanding doesn't need a shared language tonight. A few yards away, two Scots sit on overturned ammunition crates, their tartan scarves hanging stiff with frost. They take turns sketching crude figures in the air with gloved fingers, miming stories that drift from pantomime into laughter. One of the Germans tries to follow, puzzled at first, then joining in with an exaggerated gesture of his own. The small circle erupts into delighted, muffled chuckles that rise like sparks from a guttering flame. Not far from them, a corporal from London attempts to communicate with a German who speaks a scattering of English words. They trade names of towns, haltingly pointing to themselves, to the sky, to the ground, as if the land itself might bridge the gaps between sounds and syllables. The Brit mentions a sister who works in a shop. The German gestures toward a note in his coat, a message from a younger brother who has enlisted. Across the gulf of language, their eyes share the same quiet worry. Another group stands closer to the wire. One British soldier withdraws a scrap of ribbon from his breast pocket, blue and frayed, the last remnant of a Christmas gift from home. He hands it to a German who studies it with careful respect, then ties it gently around a button on his own coat. In exchange, he removes a small metal charm from his collar, a worn religious medal, and places it in the Brit's palm. They nod, a solemn, wordless pact in the winter dark. You drift toward a cluster of men sharing small pieces of ration bread. A young German, barely more than a boy, breaks his portion in half, pushing the larger piece toward a British soldier who shakes his head, insisting the boy take it back. The German simply smiles and nudges it forward again, the kind of smile that recognizes stubbornness as kinship. Eventually the Brit accepts with a quiet, humbled bow of his head. Further still, a soldier removes his glove to reveal a hand wrapped with makeshift bandages. The cold bites into exposed skin, but a German kneels beside him, examining the wound with surprising gentleness. He offers a strip of gauze from his own medical kit. The Brit protests with a tilt of the head, but the German presses it into his hand anyway. They work together in silence, fingers trembling as they secure the cloth around the injured palm. Everywhere you drift, the same truth echoes. They speak not with perfect grammar or polished words, but with offerings, gestures, photographs, and shared memories, of lives lived beyond the trenches, lives paused by war, not erased by it. And as you move through the frozen air, you feel the weight of something unspoken, a collective confession from both sides, that none of them wanted this, that all of them miss home, that hatred has always been the least natural thing they've carried. The war hangs far at the edges, watching with a kind of wary frustration. It cannot touch what happens here tonight. Not yet. Candles, prayers, and a quiet that feels almost holy. You drift through a night that becomes a living act of remembrance. The moon climbs higher, thin and cold, its light settling over the frost like a veil. The field has settled into a rhythm now. Soft movement, low voices, the hum of breath rising and dissolving into the stillness. The football has rolled to a stop. The laughter has tapered into softer echoes. What remains is something deeper, quieter, older. You hover near a small group gathered around a circle of candles. The flames bend and flutter in the wind, fighting to stay alive. Their warm glow spills over faces that look younger in this light, their harsh lines softened into gentler shapes. A German soldier kneels, shoulders hunched around the smallest candle he carries. Its wax is soft from the warmth of his pocket. He shields the flame with his hands as he sets it onto a flat stone, gently coaxing it upright. A British soldier mirrors the gesture beside him, adjusting the wick of his own candle before placing it next to the first. The two flames sway together, then steady themselves, their light growing stronger than either could manage alone. More men gather. More candles appear. A small constellation forming at the center of no man's land. The air becomes still around them, a reverent quiet that feels too delicate to name. One man removes his cap and closes his eyes. Another follows, bowing his head with a restraint born not of fear but of respect. You can't understand the words spoken in the circle. The languages mix and blur, but the meaning carries through the cold with unsettling clarity. They are speaking of the dead. Not loudly, not ceremonially, but in soft fragments. A name whispered into the frost. A hometown spoken with careful longing. A date murmured under someone's breath, as though saying it aloud restores a piece of the world. You drift closer to the candles. A British soldier unfolds a small scrap of paper, a prayer card worn at the edges. He presses it to his chest for a moment, breath catching slightly. Across from him, a German soldier touches his fingers to a simple metal crucifix hanging from a thin cord around his neck. Neither speaks, but their movements echo each other like two notes in an old, familiar hymn. Another man kneels beside a cracked shell crater. He places a sprig of fir into the frozen mud, a token from the small trees along the German line. A British soldier kneels beside him and presses a tiny piece of holly into the soil. The two plants lean together in the wind, their leaves trembling in the cold. A chaplain arrives quietly, British by his uniform, but his posture is open, his presence gentle. He does not lead. He does not preach. He simply stands among the soldiers, offering a blessing with his eyes rather than his voice. A German soldier beside him murmurs a line from a winter hymn, barely audible. The chaplain bows his head in response. Across the field, someone begins singing again, not the bright carols from earlier, but something slower, almost mournful. The melody carries like a long breath, weaving through the candles, slipping between the men, settling into the battered earth. It is answered by another voice farther away, then another. Not a choir, just scattered tones rising and falling, each man adding what he can. A British soldier lights a candle for a friend lost in the autumn. A German lights one for his brother who died 2 weeks ago. A third lights one for someone whose name he never learned. The candles burn on. They do not flicker out. And for the first time in this war, you feel that the darkness is no longer swallowing the light. Tonight, the light is swallowing the dark. Night deepens. Stories unfold like slow breaths. You drift among men who speak of the lives they left behind. The candles settle into their quiet glow, their flames steady now, anchored by the circle of bodies sheltering them from the wind. The battlefield has grown still around them, not silent in fear, not silent in anticipation, but silent in the way a chapel becomes silent when people begin to remember things they've tried hard not to forget. You move closer to one of the small gatherings. For soldiers sit in a loose ring, coats pulled tight, knees nearly touching. Their faces are faintly lit from below by the candles, their features softened into something almost tender. One British soldier reaches into his coat and pulls out a small tin. Inside is a folded piece of paper, a letter, thin and worn at the creases. He smooths it across his knee and taps a finger over a line where the ink has smudged. He doesn't read it aloud. He simply shows it to the German beside him, pointing to where a child's handwriting wobbles across the page. The German studies it with a cautious smile, nodding in sympathy as he traces the crooked letters with his gaze. A few paces away, another pair exchange photographs. A German shares one of his father standing in front of a carpenter's shop, hands broad and heavy with work. The British soldier nods, then produces a small square of paper showing a field back home, 2 sheep grazing under a wide, sunny sky. He taps the edge of the photograph, trying to convey the warmth of the place, the way the light looks in late summer. The German presses a hand over his heart as if he can feel the warmth through the image. Not far off, a younger soldier listens to an older one speak, not in the same language, but with gestures that carry more meaning than words. The older man draws a line in the air with his finger, tracing something the younger recognizes as the ridge of a mountain. He shapes a house with his hands, cups both palms together to show a cradle. The younger soldier nods deeply, understanding the story without needing the vocabulary. A home on a hill, a child waiting there, the ache that winter war leaves inside a man. You drift toward a small group sitting near a broken section of wire. A German soldier in a wool cap holds a harmonica loosely in both hands, thumb brushing thoughtfully over the metal. He plays a single note, low, tentative. Another follows. Soon the melody takes shape, fragile but warm. A British soldier listens closely, eyes half closed. When the tune falters, he hums the next phrase. The German smiles, a simple, grateful expression, and follows along. Together they thread the tune through the cold air until others begin humming with them, deepening it, expanding it. Around them, the men speak more freely. Not about tactics, not about orders, but about things that matter in a quieter world. The taste of bread from a particular bakery at home, the cry of gulls over a coastal village, the sound of a train whistle at dusk, the feel of warm water on hands after a day's work. You watch as one soldier sketches a crude map in the frost, a coastline jagged and familiar to him. A German kneels beside him and draws his own coastline beside it. The two maps touch at their edges, joining briefly before the wind begins to blur them. Another small group forms where a chaplain stands with a German corporal. They exchange small lines of scripture, each in their own language, words overlapping and drifting together. A man nearby presses his glove to his chin as he listens, eyes reflecting candlelight with a kind of vulnerable stillness usually hidden beneath grime and discipline. Even the officers who stand at a cautious distance seem softened by the sight. They make no attempt to intervene, no effort to restore order. Instead, they watch with quiet resignation, or perhaps quiet gratitude, knowing this moment belongs not to ranks and commands, but to the men who have carried the weight of the war far longer than any human should. You float through it all, feeling the night thicken around the warmth they've created, a warmth not of temperature but of memory, of shared longing, of the ancient human need to sit close and speak gently when the world becomes too heavy. This night, suspended between destruction and hope, holds them in its fragile hands, and for the briefest time, you feel the front become something closer, to a village square, than a battlefield. The night's quiet miracle reaches its height. You drift through a moment that feels outside of time. Midnight settles softly over the field, folding itself around the men like a blanket stitched from frost and breath and candlelight. The gatherings thin into gentler shapes now, smaller circles, quieter voices, men speaking in tones usually reserved for darkened living rooms or the last hour before sleep. You drift among them, nearly weightless, as though even the night air has softened enough to carry you. A few soldiers stand near a shattered tree trunk, its bark stripped by months of shelling. Someone has hung a paper star from one of the splintered branches, a small, uneven shape cut hurriedly from the corner of a letter. It trembles in the faint breeze, catching lantern light in its creases. Below it, men from both sides place items at the base. A button polished to a faint shine, a scrap of tartan cloth, a folded wrapper from a chocolate ration, a photograph of a dog sitting proudly beside a narrow river. None of these objects hold value beyond the men who carried them, yet together they become an altar of sorts, a gentle defiance of the ruins surrounding them. Not far away, a pair of soldiers, one British, one German, sit on opposite sides of a half-buried ammunition crate. A game of cards lies between them, the deck mismatched from two separate packs. They play slowly, each hand dealt with exaggerated care, as if too much speed might cause the illusion to disappear. When one soldier wins a round, the other nods with polite resignation, the faintest glimmer of amusement lighting his worn features. A group of younger men gather closer to the wire. One of them attempts to teach his counterparts a simple English phrase, repeating it with exaggerated enunciation and an abundance of gestures. The Germans mimic him, stumbling over the vowels, laughing quietly at their own errors. Then they offer a German phrase in return, which the British attempt with equal difficulty. For a moment, the battlefield becomes a classroom filled with muffled laughter and gentle corrections. You notice a chaplain seated with a German medic, both kneeling over a small patch of earth cleared of frost. They draw lines with their fingers, rough diagrams of trenches, positions, shelters, not in strategy, but to compare experiences, to marvel at how similar their burdens have been. They shake their heads in a slow, weary rhythm, as if acknowledging the futility of the suffering that has touched them in equal measure. Nearby, two Scots sit on the ground, shoulders touching. One traces a pattern on his thigh, a dance step, perhaps, or a march, while a German soldier watches, fascinated. The Scot repeats the pattern, slower this time, inviting the German to mimic it. When he tries and fumbles the rhythm, both men laugh silently, shaking their heads, their breath rising like soft smoke into the night. You drift closer to a cluster of men sharing pipe tobacco. One soldier, his cheeks hollow but his eyes warm, fills a small pipe and passes it to a German who inhales slowly, savoring the taste as though it carries warmth directly into his chest. They do not speak. They simply share the pipe, exhaling in unison, their breath clouds mingling and vanishing into the same cold air. Across the field, a harmonica begins again, the same musician from earlier, fingers now stiffer, melody slower. The tune is wistful, shaped by longing, a sound that feels more like memory than music. A violin answers from the German line, thin, slightly out of tune, but heartbreakingly sincere. The two melodies unite across the night, overlapping like two quiet confessions. You watch the soldiers' faces soften. The war wears off them, if only for a moment. Their shoulders lower, their eyes clear. Their breath, though cold, becomes gentle. For the first time in months, the front feels less like a wound and more like a place where people gather to wait for morning, the way villages once waited for dawn on Christmas Eve, with candles burning and stories shared. The miracle of the truce does not shout. It does not demand attention. It simply unfolds, quietly, steadily, as if this peace had always been waiting beneath the war, needing only a night cold enough and holy enough to bring it out of hiding. The night nears its end. You drift through the final moments of peace before the world remembers the war waiting beyond the frost. The candles burn lower now, their flames small and trembling, but still determined. You float above the field, watching how the men instinctively draw closer to the light as the cold thickens, as though warmth can be borrowed simply by sharing breath. The vastness of no man's land feels different at this hour, less like a battlefield, more like a clearing where weary travelers have gathered to rest before a long journey. A British soldier sits beside a German counterpart, both leaning against a half-collapsed sandbag wall. Between them lies a tin of biscuits, nearly empty. The German breaks the final one in half and offers the larger piece to the Brit, who politely pushes it back toward him. After a few gestures of gentle insistence, they split it evenly, eating in a rhythm that suggests companionship rather than survival. A short distance away, a man draws a circle in the frost with the toe of his boot. Another joins him, then another. Before long, they have formed a ring, 12 men standing shoulder to shoulder, alternating British and German coats. None speaks. They simply breathe together, watching the moon drift behind a thin cloud. In this quiet formation, something ancient takes shape, the simple, unspoken acknowledgement that they are brothers in cold, in fear, in longing, in the strange miracle of a night where no one must die. You drift toward a small group seated on the frozen earth. One soldier holds a music box, dented, its paint peeling, the handle stiff from the cold. He winds it slowly, and a thin, trembling melody emerges, delicate enough to crack under the weight of the air. The others listen with bowed heads, letting the tune stitch warmth into the last hours of the night. Another man reads from a small book. The words are too soft to hear, but the cadence is unmistakable, even across language differences, even across uniforms. A quiet prayer, tender and hesitant, like someone asking the night itself to remember this moment when dawn arrives. Near the center of the field, a British sergeant and a German non-commissioned officer stand face to face. Their postures are straight, not stiff, the kind of bearing that comes from years of discipline. They exchange a few words, halting but sincere. The German shows a small silver pendant hanging from a thin cord. The Brit responds by revealing a pressed flower kept safely in his pocket. They trade these tokens with solemn nods, not as souvenirs, but as signs of an unlikely trust that neither man could have imagined sharing the day before. You hover above another group of men drawing closer to their own lines. A few begin to collect the candles, pressing out the flames with careful fingers so the wax will not spill. They tuck the stubs into their pockets, keepsakes of a night they know won't come again. Their movements are slower now, heavier. Dawn is approaching, and with it, the return of orders, rifles, and the machinery of war. One soldier lingers in the open, looking back at the field. His breath forms pale clouds that drift upward and fade. He lifts a hand in farewell, not to anyone in particular, but to the night itself, to the fragile peace that has held them all, however briefly. A German across the way notices and raises his hand in return. Their gestures meet across the dim air like two faint stars touching in the dark. The harmonica plays one final line. The violin offers a last soft echo. Conversations taper into silence. The men begin to return to their trenches, turning away from the center of the field with the weight of those who know they are leaving something precious behind. You drift with them, sensing the reluctance in their steps, the heaviness in their breath. The war has not returned yet, but its shadow stretches over the frost, waiting for dawn. Before the last men disappear into the shelter of their trenches, one German calls across the field. His voice soft, cracked with cold, carrying a final wish that floats like a blessing into the night. A British soldier answers with the same quiet tone. The words fade into the distance. The candles dim. The field empties. You remain alone above the frozen silence, holding the last glimmers of a night when the world remembered itself, when, for a fragile handful of hours, men laid down their hatred like coats hung on a wooden peg and stepped into the open as brothers. The war waits. The dawn gathers. But this moment, this quiet, impossible peace, stays suspended in the cold air, echoing softly, refusing to fade. Dawn approaches. You witness the slow unraveling of the miracle, the gentle return of distance. The night thins gradually, like a breath being released after too long held. You drift above the field, feeling the cold shift as the first hints of dawn brush the edge of the sky. It begins as the faintest silver, a thin line that barely lifts the darkness, but the soldiers notice it before it fully forms. Men who have not slept straighten their backs. Men who have laughed softly grow quiet. Something delicate begins to pull at the air. The truce has lasted longer than anyone dared imagine, but now the horizon tugs at it, reminding everyone that daylight belongs to the war. A British soldier kneels to tie his bootlace, though it is already tied, the gesture more a way to linger than an actual task. A German soldier nearby adjusts the strap of his satchel several times, each motion slower than the last. They stand only a few paces apart, but both watch the paling sky as if the light itself might break under their gaze. Across the field, a pair of men trade the final scraps of their gifts, a button for a pencil stub, a piece of bread for a small carving fashioned from bone. They hold the items with a reverence you usually only see in places untouched by violence. Then each tucks his gift inside his coat with careful, deliberate movements, as though storing away a memory in tangible form. One group stands in a half-circle, heads bowed, the remnants of candle wax clumped in their palms. They close their eyes for a moment, not in fear, not in prayer exactly, but in acknowledgement. This night will not come again. They know it. They feel it in the way their breaths drift colder, shorter, more uncertain. A German officer calls softly to his men, not with sharpness, but with a voice flattened by exhaustion. A British lieutenant mirrors the gesture along his own line. Their tones are nearly identical, not because of coordination, but because both understand the sorrow in what comes next. Some soldiers linger, unwilling to be the first to return. Some hesitate, caught between gratitude and grief. Others look toward the trenches with dread, knowing the return to routine, to rifles, to orders, to suspicion, will feel heavier now. You watch a British soldier place his hand briefly on the shoulder of a German, a gesture so gentle it seems almost like a memory rather than an action. The German nods, hesitant, grateful, then steps back. The distance between them grows not from hostility, but from inevitability. The first rays of dawn touch the field, faint and frail. Shadows return. Lines reappear. And with them, the war. You feel the shift as though something warm has been lifted from the earth, exposing the cold beneath. The men begin to pull away from the center, moving not in fear but in sorrow. Boots crunch against frost as they trace the same paths that, hours ago, they crossed with trembling courage. A British sergeant folds his arms across his chest, bracing himself. A German soldier adjusts his belt, jaw tightening as the old habits settle back into place. Another man stares at the frozen ground where the football rested earlier, his breath forming a cloud that dissipates slowly, reluctantly. The truce does not end with a shout. It ends with silence. A silence heavier than all the nights before. A silence the war had never known until now. You drift above them, watching as the men step back toward their trenches, each carrying the weight of the night in his own way. What they shared cannot be undone, yet the world around them demands the illusion of separation. Dawn spreads across the field, pale, cold, unflinching, and the miracle begins to fade into memory. The final steps back. You witness the quiet ache of men returning to the roles the war demands. The first true light of morning gathers slowly, as if reluctant to reveal the world beneath it. It stretches across the frost in thin, pale ribbons, touching the broken wire, the abandoned football, the wiped patches of earth where maps and drawings once lay. The battlefield, lit now by dawn rather than candlelight, seems smaller, less magical, more itself. The men feel it immediately. You drift above them as they pause on the threshold between night and day, suspended in that narrow space where memory still holds them, yet duty pulls at their sleeves. A British soldier stands in the open for a moment longer than he should, his breath rising in soft clouds as he stares toward the German line. A German soldier mirrors him, their eyes meeting across the widening gap of returning responsibility. For a heartbeat, the field remembers the warmth of the night. Then both men look away. The spell breaks quietly, like thin ice under a slow step. Around the field, soldiers begin gathering the remnants of the truce, not to hide it, but to preserve it. A man pockets a candle stub. Another tucks a shared photograph inside his coat. A third ties a strip of ribbon around a buttonhole, the color bright against the drab wool. These small artifacts travel with them now, hidden close to their hearts, a private rebellion against the cold machinery waiting to resume its rhythm. A British officer clears his throat softly, the sound thin and weary. His men straighten out of habit, though their movements are slower, heavier. Across the field, a German officer raises a hand, signaling in much the same way. For one strange moment, the two officers' gestures align almost perfectly, unintentional, reflected like two shadows caught in the same early light. The men begin to pull away from one another, steps careful, reluctant. No one wants to be first. No one wants to be last. A group of soldiers pauses near the wire, exchanging final nods, shy, quiet acknowledgments that would not survive the full rise of the sun. A German offers one last handshake, brief and uncertain. A Brit accepts it, his glove brushing frost from the other man's sleeve. Their hands fall away. The distance grows again. The music box plays a final note before its spring unwinds. The harmonica is tucked into a coat pocket, its melody trapped inside until some future night. Someone whispers a farewell into the cold, but the wind carries it away before you can catch the words. The men retreat into their trenches not as enemies, but as people stepping back into roles they did not choose. Helmets are adjusted. Coats are tightened. Rifles, untouched for hours, rest once more in familiar hands. You drift above the field as the last figure disappears behind the parapet, leaving the center of no man's land empty, a place transformed for a night and now settling back into its silence. The candles sputter one by one, their flames surrendering to the wind. The paper star quivers on its string. The frost claims the footprints, softening their edges until the paths vanish. Soon, orders will return. Soon, gunfire will echo across the land once more. But for a few long breaths, the battlefield holds on to what happened, a memory breathed into the soil itself, fragile but unerasable. The dawn grows stronger. The war waits at its edges, and the night of peace slips quietly into history, a story men will struggle to believe, even though they lived it. You settle again on the quiet ridge between trenches, a place that feels unreal now that the field below has emptied. Dawn spreads like slow ink across the horizon, turning frost into scattered mirrors. The world looks unchanged, yet you can feel it. Something subtle has shifted. Not in the war, but in the men. They walk differently this morning. Shoulders lower, eyes softened, movements slower, as if each step has to pass through a memory first. Along the British line, soldiers unpack their gear not with the urgency of soldiers, but with the hands of people afraid to disturb something fragile. One man removes a sliver of carved wood from his pocket and turns it over in his palm. Another holds a German cigarette for a long time before hiding it deep in his coat. A third stares at a scrap of paper with hastily drawn stars, the constellations they traced together in frost. From the German side comes the same quiet ritual. Men straighten their greatcoats, reach into hidden pockets, touch little pieces of last night's peace. A ribbon, a shared prayer card, a sliver of chocolate saved rather than eaten, a folded page torn from a British notebook, now holding a message written in broken German and worse English, a promise to survive the winter. No one speaks of these things openly, but the silence carries them. You hear a faint voice in the British trench, wonder if the Germans are thinking the same thoughts. Another answers softly, not really expecting to be heard, that maybe the war has edges thinner than the generals believe, that somewhere underneath orders and fear and mud, the same blood runs. On the German side, gestures say what words cannot. A man touches two fingers to his helmet and tilts it toward the British line, as though greeting someone he knows by name but cannot call out to. And everywhere, there is breath, slow, visible, rising from the trenches in pale streams, drifting toward the place where the truce lived for those quiet hours. Each breath becomes part of something larger, something shared. The sun climbs higher. The frost begins to lose its shine. The world is returning to its script. But the men are carrying new lines within them, unspoken, unrecorded, uncommanded. You watch them preparing for duties they no longer believe in, tightening straps, checking bolts, moving through the motions with a heaviness that isn't fatigue but awareness. An understanding that the people waiting across the field are still people. And for a moment, a thin, shimmering moment, the war hesitates. Just enough to let you see that they are struggling not with the enemy, but with the knowledge that last night they saw him smile. The day after peace. You move with them into the next day, into the strange quiet that follows a night no one expected. The sky is a pale winter wash, thin light slipping down into both trenches as if unsure where to land. The wind carries no songs now, only the faint rattle of loose tin, the distant crack of shifting ice, the murmur of men who have run out of words. They return to routine because routine is what keeps them from feeling too much. Boots thud along duckboards. Rifles are checked, though hands linger too long on each piece of cold metal. Mess tins scrape softly. Orders are spoken in low tones, each syllable falling like a pebble into deep water. And yet, beneath all of it, something fragile remains. You notice it in the way British soldiers glove their hands before touching their rifles again, as if unwilling to let the metal steal the warmth still held from shared handshakes. You see it in the Germans too, the way they lift each round of ammunition with a gentleness that betrays reluctance. Neither side has fired a shot. Neither seems eager to be the one who breaks the silence. Somewhere down the line, a British private sits on an overturned crate, turning a small wooden carving between his fingers. He looks toward the German trench every few moments, as though expecting the man who gave it to appear again with another joke he can barely understand. Another soldier beside him mutters that they could have talked for hours if the war had allowed it, that the Germans seemed tired, cold, and human, which feels unsettling in ways he wasn't prepared for. On the opposite side, a German soldier holds a British prayer card tight against his chest. He whispers a line of it under his breath, stumbling over unfamiliar English sounds. His comrade nudges him gently, teasing him for practicing a foreign prayer. The man only smiles, saying quietly that it reminds him of home. The morning stretches. The frost softens. The memory of last night lingers in the air like a warm breath that refuses to fade. Then, a sound. Not a rifle. Not a shell. Just a dry, official voice echoing along the British trench, carrying orders that feel heavier than their wording. The men go still. You watch their faces shift, not with fear, but resignation. On the German side, a similar call rises, sharp and clipped, slicing through the calm. The war is waking up. You see shoulders tighten, jawlines harden. Men straighten their helmets and strap their packs, each movement quiet but decisive, the choreography of duty, learned by repetition, dulled by necessity. And you can feel it. The truce wasn't undone by hatred, but by gravity, the weight of something larger than all of them pulling the world back toward violence. Still, the hesitation remains. A British soldier lifts his head above the parapet for just a breath. Across the field, a German soldier does the same. The two men lock eyes for an instant. Neither enemy, neither friend, just two lives briefly aligned on the timeline of the world. No words are exchanged. None are needed. They both duck back down. The day presses on. And though the war resumes its shape, something slips between its gears, something soft and stubborn. An understanding. A memory. A night carved out of winter where, for a few hours, they were men instead of uniforms. You hold that knowledge with them as the lines tighten and the orders grow louder, and the world returns, reluctantly, to the way it was. The echo that wouldn't fade. You follow them into the next evening, long after the truce has dissolved back into ordinary war. The sky has shifted to a deeper gray, thick with low clouds that look heavy enough to press against the earth. A thin wind schemes across the trenches, slipping through every crack, every sleeve, every thought. Nothing about the landscape shows what happened the night before. But everything about the men does. British soldiers move with deliberate slowness as they settle into their routine. They check rifles, but with hands that seem reluctant to grip so tightly. They adjust straps, cinch belts, test bayonet latches, yet the motions feel quieter, as though carried out behind a veil. A few men pause at the parapet and stare across the field, searching for the silhouettes they shared laughter with. On the German side, similar gestures flicker like reflections in still water. A man tugs at his greatcoat collar, lost in thought. Another stands with both hands in his pockets, shoulders rising and falling with long, steady breaths. A third tries to focus on cleaning his rifle, but his mind keeps drifting. He rubs the bolt so gently it barely clicks. And you see it everywhere. A softness the war has not yet managed to bury again. You move through the British trench as evening deepens. A soldier unwraps a small piece of sausage given to him the night before, lifts it to his nose, then lowers it again. He doesn't eat it. He just holds it, remembering. His comrade beside him mutters something about never thinking he'd hear a German laugh, and how strange it felt to match that sound with a human face instead of an enemy's silhouette. Another man holds a British-made pencil with a German's handwriting on the side. A name. A hometown he cannot pronounce. He whispers it under his breath, testing the unfamiliar vowels, as if trying to make the world a little wider than the trench he stands in. Across no man's land, you observe similar movements in the German line. A soldier sits on a crate, gently turning a British button he traded for a bit of tobacco. He holds it to the light, examining the embossed crown as though it is something sacred. Another soldier has tucked a scrap of paper into his breast pocket, a small drawing of the night sky made by a British private. He touches it every few minutes, almost without thinking. And then there are the men who look toward the field with quiet longing, as if hoping the truce might happen again by accident, just because they want it badly enough. But war does not allow these things to repeat. You watch as officers on both sides walk the line with their usual strides, though even they carry a shadow of yesterday's peace in their eyes. They speak of vigilance, preparedness, discipline, the familiar vocabulary of conflict, but the words fall flat, swallowed by a silence that has grown deeper than the trenches themselves. The soldiers listen because they must, but their thoughts drift elsewhere. Later, as the sky dims into a nearly featureless dusk, you see two British soldiers on watch duty leaning forward to peer across the field. The ground lies still, the frost thickening again as night settles. One of them whispers that he half expects to see a German helmet bob up with a candle, or hear a soft hymn drifting over the wire. His partner shakes his head slowly, not to dismiss the idea, but because he wishes it were true. Across the field, German sentries do the same, glancing toward the British trench, searching for some sign that the miraculous pause might echo for one more night. It doesn't. But the longing remains. As darkness deepens, lanterns glow inside dugouts, casting pale circles on wooden walls. You drift among them and see men writing letters by candlelight, hands stiff with cold. Some describe the truce in halting words, unsure how to explain the impossible without making it sound like a dream. Others leave out the details entirely, too afraid that saying it aloud will make it disappear. One British soldier writes, "Mother, last night I saw the enemy, and he looked like someone's son." A German soldier writes, "There was a moment when the world felt small enough for peace to fit inside it." Another letter remains unfinished. The writer stares at his own handwriting, then tears the page out, crumples it, and sets it aside, not because he regrets what he wrote, but because he cannot find the ending. Night continues to fall. Lanterns flicker. breath hangs in the air. And then, somewhere far in the distance, not close enough to be dangerous, but close enough to be heard, a single artillery gun fires. The shell lands miles away, a distant boom muffled by snow. No one moves for several seconds. On the British side, a soldier closes his eyes. On the German side, another lowers his head. Both know what it means. The world has resumed its forward motion. The machine has awakened. Peace has retreated back into whatever hidden place it came from. The war does not return all at once. It returns in ripples. A shouted command. A rifle being checked a little more firmly. A man lifting his helmet with renewed resignation. The soft, inevitable tightening of discipline. And yet, beneath all of it, you still feel something resisting. Something within them that refuses to let the night slip away entirely. You see British soldiers exchange faint nods with their German counterparts when they catch a glimpse across the wire. Not waves. Not gestures. Just the barest acknowledgement, a silent confirmation that the truce was real, even if it cannot continue. You see German soldiers mutter softly about the British men they spoke to, their voices carrying nothing but tired respect. One mentions a Scotsman with a harmonica. Another remembers a man with a photograph of two small children. A third still hears the melody of the shared hymn echoing in his mind. And you realize that the war, for all its machinery, all its orders, all its towering weight, failed to erase those memories. The night of peace left an echo inside them, an echo that will not fade easily, an echo that might, in some quiet way, survive even longer than they do. You remain there in the stillness, watching the frost return to the ground where soldiers once stood shoulder to shoulder. The warmth has gone, but the imprint remains, in the soil, in the air, in the men, in the story the world will one day try to remember. And as the first true darkness of the night settles over the trenches, you feel a truth rising softly. That peace, even when brief, leaves a mark deeper than war expects. The weight of knowing. You stay with them as night settles fully over the trenches once more. The cold sharpens, the wind stiffens, the frost creeps up the sandbags like a slow, pale tide. But something has changed in the air, an awareness that wasn't there before, as if both sides are listening for echoes that refuse to disappear. You drift through the British line first. A quiet has settled over the men, not the fearful quiet of waiting for shells, but the heavy quiet that follows revelation. A soldier sits with his back against the wall, turning a harmonica in his hands. He doesn't play it. He only traces the metal with a fingertip, remembering the German violinist who matched his tune under moonlight. Not far from him, another soldier lifts a mug of weak tea and pauses before drinking, staring across the dark field as if he can still see the shapes of the men he spoke to. He whispers to no one in particular that last night didn't feel like a miracle. It felt like the world remembering itself. His breath fades into the air, carrying the thought away. Across no man's land, German soldiers move with the same reflective stillness. A man sits on a small wooden box, polishing a British button he traded in the truce. He rubs the surface with slow, circular motions, revealing the faint shine beneath the grime. Every few seconds he stops, closes his eyes, and takes a breath that trembles slightly in the cold. Another soldier stares at his gloved hands, flexing them as though testing their memory. He says softly, almost too softly to hear, that shaking a British hand last night felt strange only for the first moment. After that, it felt like something his body already understood. You follow the wind as it sweeps across the field, brushing gently over the ground where footprints once converged. They're gone now, erased by frost. But the land still holds the memory of their warmth. You can feel it in the soil beneath the ice, as if the earth itself refuses to forget. In the British trench, a young soldier rewrites the same letter 3 times. In each version, he tries to capture the feeling of standing unarmed in no man's land, surrounded by the people he'd been told were his enemies. Each time he stops, pen suspended above the page, unable to find words that don't make it sound impossible. Finally, he writes only this: "For a moment, we were all alive in the same world." Across the field, a German soldier finishes his own letter with a line that mirrors it. "The war paused long enough for us to see who we might have been." The parallel is accidental, but not surprising. You feel a tremor in the air, not danger, just the faint hum of tension creeping back into the bones of the trenches. A reminder that the world is returning to its script. And yet, no one truly settles back into it. Men lie down to rest, but not easily. They shift, turn, lift their heads, as if waiting for a sound that never comes. The absence of singing weighs heavier than the presence of gunfire ever did. The silence feels stretched, hollowed by memory. Somewhere down the line, you hear a low conversation drifting through the darkness. A British voice, quiet. "Do you think they're thinking about us?" A German voice, faint across the wind, asking almost the same question. "Ob sie auch uns denken?" Do they think of us too? The answers never reach each other, but the sentiment does. You watch as both sides prepare for sleep that will not truly come. Blankets are pulled tighter, helmets arranged near beds of straw, boots left ready for sudden movement. But the men's eyes remain open longer than usual, reflecting not fear but contemplation. Because now they know something they cannot unknow, that the enemy has a face, a voice, a laugh, a home, a memory of music, and that knowledge has weight. The war will continue. It must. But the men will never return to the blank hatred expected of them. A final wind sweeps across the field, carrying the faintest trace of pine from a forgotten fir branch left in the open. It drifts like a thread of warmth through the cold. You follow it as it slips between trenches, quiet and persistent, a reminder of a night that allowed them, just once, to be human together. And though the world has moved on, you feel it still. The truce has ended, but its echo remains, soft, enduring, and impossible to silence. The quiet that followed them. You linger with them into the following morning, long after the frost has sealed over the last traces of footsteps in no man's land. The sky is pale again, stretched thin over the frozen landscape, and the air carries that muted heaviness that comes after something important has passed, something too delicate for the world to hold on to. From the British trench, you watch a line of soldiers gather near the fire step, their eyes red from cold and sleeplessness. They lean against the timber walls, not speaking, just looking outward as if trying to find the exact places where their memories still stand. One man fingers a fragment of wax from a melted candle, rolling it between numb fingertips. Another holds a bit of pine, its scent faded but not entirely gone. Across the field, the German trench mirrors the same slow awakening. A soldier sits on the edge of a dugout, rubbing his thumb over the corner of a folded note given to him the night before. His comrade sits beside him in silence, staring at the British line as though trying to hold on to something already slipping away. You see their breath rise in small, steady clouds, quiet proof that they are still here, still alive, still human beneath the layers of wool and mud. Winter presses down on all of them. And yet, beneath that weight, something tender remains. You move along the trench walls, listening to the small sounds of morning routine, the scrape of tin mugs, the rustle of blankets being folded away, the metallic click of rifles checked more out of habit than intention. None of the men rush. None of them speak loudly. Every movement feels softened, as if the war itself is still half asleep. A British soldier bends to tie his boot but pauses midway, his gaze drifting toward the spot where he shared a cigarette with a German the night before. His shoulders rise with a breath he doesn't finish. On the German side, a soldier traces a shape in the frost, a star, then another, before wiping them away with the flat of his hand. For a moment, time seems to loosen. Nothing moves but the wind. Nothing stirs but memory. And you realize something simple, something quiet. Peace does not disappear all at once. It lingers in gestures, in objects, in the places where hands once met. It lingers in the way they look at the field now, with recognition instead of fear. The war will reclaim this place soon enough. But not yet. Not fully. For now, the quiet that followed them holds its place. Thin, trembling, but real. And they carry it, each in their own way, as they prepare to step back into a world that no longer feels quite the same. Aftermath. The night that didn't belong to war. You stay with them as the day drifts onward, as the sky brightens into a pale winter blue that feels almost indifferent to what happened the night before. You watch the trenches regain their shape, not through violence, not through orders, but through habit, through the dull gravity of a world that has forgotten how to stop. Rifles are lifted again, though not quite as firmly. Boots stamp frost from wooden boards. The small fires die out one by one, leaving behind thin trails of smoke that weave into the air like fading threads of memory. And as you look across no man's land, empty now, cold again, it feels impossible that hours ago it held laughter, candlelight, shared warmth, the fragile spark of something the war could not predict. You listen to the men breathe. It's different now. Not the sharp, anxious breath of waiting for shells. Not the ragged breath of fear. But something slower, heavier, the breath of people who've been shown a truth they can't unlearn. On the British side, a soldier sits with his back against a support beam. He rolls a German cigarette between his fingers, not smoking it, just holding it as if it anchors him to something steadier than the trench. Another man has tied a scrap of ribbon to the inside of his coat. It flutters softly when he moves, a tiny reminder of a night that felt like stepping outside the war's shadow. Across the field, in the German trench, a soldier carefully smooths the edges of a folded prayer card. He touches it once, then tucks it back deep into his greatcoat, close to the heart. Others adjust their equipment in silence, their eyes flicking toward the British line not with hostility, but with a strange, quiet yearning, the wish that peace had lasted long enough to settle into their bones. You sense them all thinking the same unspoken thing. We saw each other. We saw who we might have been without this war. The echo that wouldn't fade. But the world does not reward such thoughts. Orders rise again, clipped, hollow, mandatory, not shouted with fire, but with weariness. Even the officers seem reluctant, as if ashamed to be the ones waking the war from its sleep. You watch the men react, not with rebellion, not with outrage, just with the slow exhale of resignation, because peace, as they learned last night, is delicate. It arrives softly, stays briefly, then slips away before anyone can find the words to hold it. By afternoon, the lines have settled back into their separate rhythms. A shovel scrapes against frozen mud. A kettle begins to steam. Somewhere far down the ridge, you hear the metallic click of a rifle bolt sliding forward. Practiced, familiar, inevitable. But the war is not the same as it was the day before. And neither are the men. They carry the memory of the night like a quiet flame inside their coats, hidden from view, but alive. A flame that will glow years after this field falls silent, years after these trenches collapse into earth, years after those candles guttered in the frost. You imagine them returning home, telling someone, a wife, a child, a brother, that once, on Christmas Eve, the world paused. That once, the coldest night of winter warmed itself on human breath. That once, enemies placed hands on one another's shoulders and felt the steady beat of life beneath uniforms designed to separate them. Not everyone will believe them, but it won't matter, because they will remember. As the light dims at the edge of the sky, you linger a while longer. The field between trenches holds an echo now, faint but permanent, of footsteps, laughter, prayer, music, and fragile forgiveness. A memory left behind in frost and candle wax. Eventually, night returns. Not the same night as before. This one is quieter, colder, a night aware of what it briefly allowed. You stand in the stillness and realize something soft. The truce was not a miracle. It was a reminder, a simple truth rising through mud and wire, that even here, where the world tried to bury humanity, it found a way to breathe again. You take one last look across the field, where peace lived for a heartbeat long enough to be remembered. Before you drift off, take a moment to subscribe, but only if stories told in whispers are your kind of thing. And tell us where you're listening from, or which image of this fragile night lingered with you the most. You've been part of Echoes of War, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.